Whenever people talk about spirituality or use the word spiritual, sometimes I'm so confused because there are at least 5 definitions for the word spiritual in our culture. In this video, I'm going to go over the 5 definitions to try to demystify this mystical word, spirituality. As I go into these definitions, I'm not saying that any one is correct and the others are incorrect, or that any are better than the others. If we want to have a really holistic view, an integral view of spirituality, we need to kind of account for all of them. It's just really valuable to know which one we're referring to so that we can understand each other. So the first definition for the word spiritual is basically describing the highest point of any of the different developmental lines. And if you check out the video on multiple intelligences, that's what I'm talking about. So for example, the highest part of the affect line of development would be like love, universal love, transpersonal love. Or of moral development, it would be, caring for others, compassion. So we think of love and we think of compassion as these qualities that are more spiritual. Or if you look at the cognitive line of development, very high levels of cognitive development are starting to look like kind of like scary intuition, but it's actually part of that intelligence, the cognitive intelligence, very high levels. So you take any one of the various multiple intelligences and you take the highest levels, and people can describe that as spiritual. I mean, Michael Jordan, it really looked like he was levitating. And that's just such a high level of kinesthetic development. So any one of the peaks of the multiple intelligences, people can describe that as spiritual. Love is more spiritual than hatred. Compassion is more spiritual than indifference. Like that. So the second definition for the word spiritual is basically if you take all the different multiple intelligences, which we're also calling lines of development, and you add up the sum total of the peaks of all of those, the top of all of those different lines of development. So somebody who's really developed themselves musically and morally and psychosexually and cognitively, somebody who's really developed themselves at all these different areas, we sometimes use that like some kind of superhuman being. Sometimes we use that as our definition for the word spiritual. A third definition for spirituality is treating spiritual growth and development as its own type of intelligence or its own developmental line with its own progression and growth. So we can measure that in different ways. For example, deep meditative concentration could be one way of accounting for that growth and development. There's actually quite a bit of research that supports treating spiritual growth and development as its own line or type of intelligence. A fourth definition for spirituality is that spirituality is like an attitude or an openness that I carry with me all the time, everywhere I go. And you can experience, or you can take with you that openness and that love, or you can show up with openness and love in any situation, regardless of what level of development you're at. That's another definition for spiritual. This attitude or this openness that we carry with us everywhere. The fifth definition of spiritual is that spiritual is basically some form of peak experience. So it might happen spontaneously while I'm walking in the woods. I have this sense of oneness with everything. So this kind of peak experience, we can call that spiritual. Or perhaps it's in some kind of ceremony with power plants like ayahuasca or peyote, and I have this peak experience. Or perhaps it's doing something like holotropic breath work or yoga or meditation, and I have a peak experience. So that's another definition of spiritual, is we have these states of intense awareness and clarity, and we call those spiritual. One thing about states, peak experiences, is we want to distinguish them from stages. So a stage of development is something that becomes stable in my experience once I grow into it. If taking some kind of substance helps me experience some kind of state experience, taking it again and again and again and again and again is not going to make me live there. It's not going to create a stage. It's just going to keep creating these states. However, there's physiological toxicity or other things or resistance like physical tolerance to substances, or simply it doesn't help you create a stage of development. So just make sure that you have that difference clear. That said, states can be really valuable. They can change your life forever. There's an old teaching that talks about how valuable state experiences are, that talks about, it's a parable. Imagine a person who their whole life they've grown up in a room that's pitch black. They've never been able to see what's in the room, but they've been told their whole life that there's a snake in the corner of the room. So their whole life, they're just terrified. They live in terror of this snake that's living in the corner of the room. And let's say that somebody comes and turns the light on for 5 minutes. And after that 5 minutes, the light goes off again, and it's dark, and this person's living in pitch darkness again. But in that 5 minutes of illumination, they realize that that's no snake, it's a rope. There's no snake in the corner anymore. It's actually a rope. Lights are off, and this person's plunged into the darkness again, but their life has changed forever because that deep fear, that deep terror of the snake in the corner is gone. They realize it's not a snake. So sometimes our peak experiences can change our life forever, and they can give us these insights that can be like a magnet that helps to pull our further growth and development in that direction. So I'm not against states. We do want to differentiate between states and stages. Stages which we grow into through personal practice. So these are 5 different definitions that we have for the word spiritual in our culture, and they're all correct in their own way. Just make sure you're being clear what you're talking about so that we can connect when we're in a conversation. Please scroll down, check out the links, leave me a comment. I would love your feedback. I actually grow through feedback, so it would be a gift to me if you leave me a comment. Peace.